Hi, everyone. Hello. We are so grateful that you've all taken time today to learn about our work. We've had over 3,200 people RSVP to be with us virtually and in person. Such a testament to the commitment of change makers around the country to advancing upward mobility and racial equity for all people and communities. My name is Keith Fudge. I'm the director of Urban's Upward Mobility Initiative. And before we begin, just want to provide a few housekeeping items. It's not advancing for me. So the event is being recorded. The recording and relevant links will be posted online after the event. Live captions are turned on. If you want to turn them off, click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions using the QR code, which will be on the screen or at your table. For those in our virtual audience, you can type your question into the Q&A box at any time. And you can engage with us online using #LiveAtUrban. We'll be providing you a link to a post-event survey, and we ask that you share your feedback with us. It's helpful for us and our speakers to hear your thoughts and to help shape what we do in the future. So with that, in 2016, the Urban Institute partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to host the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, a group of cross-sector leaders that asked a critical question: what would it take to dramatically increase mobility from poverty in the United States? The partnership accomplished so much through research and engagement with communities experiencing barriers to mobility. But to me, maybe its most important contribution was how the partnership redefined mobility itself, arguing that economic success alone isn't enough. That instead, they said that real mobility has three interconnected dimensions: economic success, or when people have adequate income and assets to support their and their families' material well-being; power and autonomy, or when people have control over their lives, can make choices, and can influence larger policies and actions that affect their future; and dignity and belonging, or when people feel the sense of being valued and respected for their contributions to their family, work, and community. We've taken that holistic understanding of upward mobility and have been working ever since to develop a framework and a set of tools that can support leaders to advance mobility and racial equity at the local level. In 2019, we started by convening a working group of scholars to understand the factors most strongly predictive of long-term upward mobility, and then vetted these predictors with hundreds of stakeholders across the country and developed ways to measure them. That process led to our upward mobility framework and mobility metrics. We then partnered with 8 counties and cities over 18 months to help them use the framework and metrics to develop their own plans to increase local mobility and racial equity. And we used feedback and lessons learned from that process to refine our framework. And we developed a guide that places across the country could use to access and apply these data, resources, and guidance to. And over the past 2 years, our team has really scaled these efforts to support more communities in more ways. This has included technical assistance to the 26 cities and counties in our Mobility Action Learning Network, and to community cohorts led by national organizations like the National Association of Counties and CF Leads, virtual workshops and in-person presentations at practitioner conferences and network convenings, and outreach to communities interested in applying the framework, a wide range of planning and partnerships to enhance how we conduct technical assistance and customize our support for places with different needs and local contexts, and the huge amount of data development, user design, research, and technical work required to build what we're about to show you today, the Upward Mobility Data Dashboard and its support tools. I couldn't be prouder of our team, which includes dozens of staff at Urban representing different areas of expertise, external advisors and contractors, and a wide array of partnerships with other organizations committed to upward mobility and equity. And as our work has evolved, we've been so fortunate to have a committed philanthropic partner and a program officer who's brought her expertise to help us navigate the growing field of upward mobility and sharpen our focus on how our tools can help local decision makers have impact. Kosar Jahani has been our partner on this journey since 2018. She's a senior program officer at the Economic Mobility and Opportunity team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In this role, she develops and advances the foundation's strategy by designing and implementing investment portfolios on research, metrics, and data infrastructure, as well as targeted support to local government stakeholders. I'm thrilled to welcome Kosar to our virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, although virtually. As Keith mentioned, my name is Kosar Jahani, and I'm here on behalf of the Economic Mobility and Opportunity team of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. For those of you who follow the foundation's work, you'll know that their focus in the US has been primarily on education. That includes education all across the learner journey, everything from early learning to K-12 and up through to college access and beyond. But as I imagine all of you here today also know, and the research and evidence suggests, in today's America, education alone is not nearly enough to ensure that Americans will experience upward mobility, whether that's within their lifetimes or across generations. And as Keith mentioned, this question of what it would take to significantly increase upward mobility for Americans has been the motivating force behind our team's work since day one. Very early on in our work, when our team was deciding who our main stakeholders would be as a strategic initiative, we landed on local government and local leaders. So all of you all in the audience, we know very clearly from research in this space that local conditions, and I would even call them micro-local conditions that come down to a child's zip code and neighborhood, they play such a huge part in their life trajectories as adults. And we know that we can't expect local communities to make progress unless those conditions aren't being clearly defined or measured. And that is, in a nutshell, sort of the origin story of this work. As Keith mentioned, the US Partnership on Poverty was really asking a question of what does it mean to have a clear definition of economic mobility? And we succeeded there. But very urgently, the next question was, how do you actualize that definition? And that's how we landed on this work on developing a set of mobility metrics that are anchored in a very holistic mobility framework. Beyond this conceptualization, we wanted to ensure that local leaders had all the right data and tools to be able to impact economic mobility in their communities. And we've been devoting substantial resources to build out and refine those tools. So the work you're going to see showcased here today, as Keith mentioned, is the culmination of multiple years of this effort, always in partnership with the Urban Institute, but we've had a lot of local leaders join us on this journey. We've done user testing with actual government teams and community leaders to arrive at this point. And our goal is to continue those feedback loops, especially with the much larger audience that we have here today. So I'm grateful for your time to learn about these tools and more so excited for what's going to come next for us as you continue to engage with them. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for your energy. And I'm going to hand things over to today's MC, Lee Evans from the Urban team.
Thank you, Keith and Kosar. As Kosar mentioned, my name is Lee Evans. I am a policy coordinator with Urban's Research to Action Lab, and I will be your MC today. It's wonderful to see all of you here, both in person and online, for the launch of the Upward Mobility Data Dashboard. And if you're here for the Oktoberfest celebration, that's upstairs. It's not here. It's okay if you slip off now. But we are here to gather for a shared commitment to boosting upward mobility and effecting positive change in our communities. The Upward Mobility Framework is the thread that ties together everything you will hear about today. It is a foundation for local leaders to advance upward mobility and racial equity for all people and communities. Now, as you heard Keith and Kosar mention, the framework begins with a holistic definition of upward mobility. This definition includes economic success, dignity and belonging, and power and autonomy. We place a specific emphasis on racial equity. We do this because many of the barriers that block people's economic success, power, and dignity result from long-standing and ongoing racism. This racism is built into policies, processes, institutions, and culture. For that reason, racial equity is woven throughout the framework's components. To serve those most harmed by racist systems, local leaders should prioritize racial equity in both processes and outcomes. At the next level, we have the pillars. People cannot surmount systemic barriers to upward mobility on their own. Communities must ensure residents can access the supports that all people need to achieve economic success, power, and dignity. The Upward Mobility Framework identifies 5 interconnected pillars of support that are essential to upward mobility. They are rewarding work, high-quality education, opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods, healthy environments and access to good health care, and responsive and just governance. Finally, we have the predictors. 24 factors strongly associated with long-term economic success, dignity and belonging, and power and autonomy. Examples of predictors across the 5 pillars include jobs paying living wages, access to preschool, housing stability, environmental quality, and political participation. Local leaders such as yourselves can measure the status of each predictor and progress towards improving it using our suite of mobility metrics. As we begin the presentations, I'd like to invite you to reflect on who or what inspires you in this work. Maybe it's a mentor or a friend or a community member or even a family member. Consider the impression they've made on you as we engage in our conversations today. I had the privilege of asking each of our speakers who or what inspires them to do this work, and I'll be including what they shared in my introduction for each speaker so we can learn a bit more about their inspiration for being here today. I'm excited to introduce Samantha Fu, a Senior Policy Associate at Urban. Sam is inspired by the people in her community who shine brightly even in the face of the many barriers that try to drag them down. Sam does this work because she is excited to see what we can all achieve together when those barriers come down. I'd like to invite Sam to the stage.
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you to Lee for such a thoughtful introduction. I could not be more excited to introduce you to our new Upward Mobility Data Dashboard today. But before I do that, I want to provide just a little bit of context on how and why we made the dashboard. As you heard from Lee just now, Urban's Upward Mobility Framework includes 24 predictors that are strongly associated with economic success, power and autonomy, and dignity and belonging. For each of the predictors, we also identified 1 or more metrics that can be used to measure performance in the short and medium terms. We call that suite of measures the mobility metrics. To help illustrate that relationship, what you see on the screen right now are the metrics for the rewarding work pillar. The metric we use to measure employment opportunities, for example, is the share of adults aged 25 to 54 who are employed. The metric we use to measure financial security is the share of adults with debt in collection in a given community, and so on. To make the full suite of mobility metrics available to changemakers, such as yourselves, we created the Upward Mobility Data Dashboard, which lets users explore the metrics for all counties in the US and for the nearly 500 cities with more than 75,000 residents. We made this dashboard because we've heard from many leaders that to make meaningful progress on upward mobility, they need actionable metrics. And not only metrics that can measure change over the long term, but also metrics that can be used in the near term to set priorities, make decisions, and importantly, course correct if needed. As Keith alluded to, the dashboard has been nearly 2 years in the making. And part of the reason for that is because we really wanted to create a tool that would actually be used by people and communities to advance upward mobility and racial equity, not just something that would sit on our servers gathering metaphorical dust. To make sure of that, we convened an 11-person advisory committee composed of folks with a wide range of experiences, from organizers and advocates to local government staff and data experts. We also performed extensive user testing as we developed our prototypes, and we worked closely with human-centered designers and developers, all to ensure that the features that ultimately made it into the dashboard were driven by feedback from the people most positioned to use it to affect change. And you might be wondering at this stage who those people are. And the answer is most probably you. We genuinely believe that the mobility metrics can be valuable for many different types of users, including, of course, policymakers in local government and beyond, but also actors like advocacy groups and community-based organizations who might be looking for data to build support for their work, or philanthropic organizations who might be looking for evidence to inform their funding agendas, and also companies in the private sector, many of whom are interested in workforce development and the well-being of their employees. Which brings me to how you can use the data dashboard. And despite what the slide suggests, I want to caveat that there are probably as many different ways to use the dashboard as there are people in this room. As a starting point, though, I want to offer the following 4 ways, which are to understand conditions in your communities, to contextualize them by comparing to similar places across the country, to prioritize areas where you can have the greatest impact, and to monitor progress over time. I'm going to spend the remainder of my time today showing you what it looks like to do those things in the dashboard. To start with, you can use the dashboard just to understand what the data say about conditions in your communities. The dashboard can help you answer important questions like, to what extent are people in my community able to obtain jobs, or find homes they can afford, or even access the healthcare that they need? And you can do that by searching for your community, as you're seeing on the screen right now. To answer the questions I just posed, we could look at the employment opportunities predictor, the housing affordability predictor, and the access to health services predictor, each of which is shown on what we call a data card. Once you've searched for your community, you can also add more predictors at any time using the navigation bar on the left. And then just as importantly, the dashboard can help you uncover racial and other inequities in your community. As you'll hear more about from our other speakers, historical and ongoing racial discrimination in our policies and our practices has resulted in especially stubborn barriers to upward mobility for people of color in this country, which means that supporting the upward mobility of all people and communities requires first confronting and then dismantling these barriers. And the dashboard can help you take that first step by showing you how conditions differ for people of different racial and ethnic groups, as well as people of different ages and gender identities, among other characteristics. You can do that by expanding the data card and selecting the category that you're interested in. We try to provide disaggregated data for as many metrics as possible, but in some cases, we're limited by the granularity of the underlying data, which does mean that the availability and type of disaggregation varies by metric. Once you know how your community fares on any given metric, your next question is probably going to be something like, well, what does that actually mean? Is my community doing well, or is it doing poorly? And fortunately, the dashboard can help you answer that question in 2 different ways. The first is by showing you how your community is performing relative to places that are similar to yours. If you already know who your peer cities and counties are or who you'd like to compare to, you can add them at any time at the top of the page. But if you're not sure where to start, we provide suggestions for communities that you might want to compare yourself to based on a combination of factors such as size of the population, demographics, proximity to you, and density, among other things. And then the second way is by showing you how your community is doing compared to all other places in the country, so that you have a national benchmark against which to assess your performance. And you can do that by searching for your community to pinpoint it on the map, or by looking at where your community falls on the distribution relative to the national median. A third way to use the dashboard is to identify areas where your efforts can have the greatest impact. Thus far, we've just looked at a couple predictors at a time, but it's important to look at the full range of predictors and metrics when assessing conditions in your community, because no single factor is responsible for determining upward mobility over the long term. But unless you have unlimited resources and attention, you'll probably need to prioritize addressing some conditions before others. And the dashboard can help you do that by showing you snapshots of how your community is doing across all 24 predictors, helping you easily identify areas where your community is already doing well and areas where targeted interventions might make a difference. Last, but certainly not least, whether you are actively implementing new policies and programs or just looking for a way to hold your elected officials accountable, The dashboard can help you understand your community's trajectory thus far and monitor progress moving forward. Many of the metrics were chosen to reflect structural conditions in communities, so tracking how they change over time can help you assess the degree to which your work is succeeding in changing systems rather than individual circumstances. For instance, as you see here, rather than using a metric like life expectancy as a measure of health, we look at the number of physicians available in each community, which is a systems-level condition that reflects the availability of care. You can see how conditions in your community have changed over time by selecting the All Available Years option. But as with the disaggregated data, it's worth noting that available years vary by metric based on the underlying data source. And that concludes my quick preview of what the dashboard is capable of, but I promise that was just the tip of the iceberg. The dashboard contains a host of other features that can help you bring key stakeholders to a common table, get them to agree on priorities for funding and policy change, and support accountability across sectors and actors. I really hope you have the opportunity to spend some time with it in the coming days and weeks, and we cannot wait to see how you use it to advance upward mobility and racial equity in your communities. We would love to hear your thoughts on the dashboard and how we might be able to make it more useful for you. So please reach out to us at the email on screen, upwardmobilitydashboard@urban.org, if you have any feedback or suggestions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sam, for that excellent dashboard demo. I don't know how she synced up her voice with the video so well, but that was amazing. I need to figure out from her how to do that. As a reminder, you don't have to wait to pose questions that you have about things you're seeing on the screen, questions that are popping up. You can ask them at any time, and we'll try to answer them during the Q&A. So if you're in this room, you can scan that QR code with your phone, and it'll take you to a place where you can ask questions. And if you're joining us virtually today, there is a Q&A box where you can type your questions. So, as Sam just showed, the dashboard is a powerful mechanism. It can both motivate and shape local action. But the mobility metrics shouldn't be used in isolation. Our next presenter, Tina Chalidze, who is a policy associate at Urban, will speak about a new tool you can use to strengthen the mobility metrics with local data. Tina is inspired by the uniqueness of the American experiment. This is the idea that national identity does not have to be based on race or religion. Rather, it can be linked to a shared immigrant experience where we all have a fair chance to pursue happiness, success, and opportunity. This is no better symbolized than with the Statue of Liberty, who lifts her lamp beside the golden door. Tina believes it is our duty to fulfill that promise. Let's hear from Tina.
Thank you so much, Lee. Hi, everyone. Okay, so as Sam just showed you before, the dashboard gives us valuable insights into key trends in community conditions that are related to upward mobility. But then when it comes to identifying and tackling the underlying systems that are creating those conditions, it also raises several questions, which is part of what the dashboard is designed to do. The goal of the framework and the metrics overall is to help you understand the root causes of the mobility-related conditions in your community. So in this presentation, I'm going to dive into how you can combine the mobility metrics with further resources and data to better answer those questions. So here, we have created and compiled a series of tools and resources that help users of the data dashboard take their insights from the mobility metrics and dive deeper. On the left, we have resources for using the mobility metrics and other local data. And on the right, we have resources that direct you to strategies for increasing upward mobility generally. And here are the two that we're going to be highlighting today. One is called Obtaining More Local Data, and the other is Promising Local Policy Interventions. But before we get into that, let's ground ourselves in an example. So imagine with me that this local community group is trying to find ways to boost economic stability within their local region. They attend an urban upward mobility event, and they learn about the data dashboard, much as you are today. And knowing, of course, that the average living wage of paid jobs in their community is a strong predictor of economic stability, they start to explore that data in the dashboard. So here we have them looking at the dashboard specifically for mobility metrics in Fresno County, California, and they're looking at the metric for jobs paying living wages. They see from the dashboard that the average job pays only 57 cents for every dollar that a family in Fresno County would need to afford their local cost of living, which, if you notice, is lower than the median and much lower than the $1 that would actually make living affordable. So they might be asking themselves a question at this point, which is, how can this be true? And is it true for all jobs in our community? So then they have the option to select a category breakdown within the dashboard to explore that further. They can choose to break down these data by industry. And then this shows us that the wage numbers look quite different based on what sector the job is in Fresno County. So public administration, information, and professional services seem to be paying more money. And it's actually specifically information service jobs that actually pay a living wage that is making life affordable for the community. So now that we have seen those data, the community group might be wondering what else could be hidden in these overall averages. We see that looking further is quite important. Are there maybe specific populations that experience these wages differently? What is it about those industries that contributes to such disparities in the wages? And they realize that they want to know how to get more information to really get to the root of these conditions. They might also ask, is this really the best way for us to be targeting upward mobility in our community? And what evidence is there of that? And finally, they might ask, what do I do with all of this information? How do I move from simply analyzing these data into then taking action? How can we address this metric with the work that we do as a group? So let's start with their first question. How can we get more information to determine the root causes of these mobility conditions? Well, when you scroll to the very bottom of the data dashboard, you actually see several tools and resources linked with a description in a section that's called Use the Mobility Metrics Data. To answer their question, we're going to go ahead and focus on the third tool that's linked here called Obtaining More Local Data. When you click into this resource, you'll see that it leads you to an extensive catalog of data sources that exist across the internet. And these are vetted by source and practice area, and they are actually tagged based on what pillar or predictor from the framework those data sources are aligned with. So because our example community group is looking for more resources that can help them better research jobs paying a living wage, they go ahead and type that into the filter search. So they type in the predictor name and it pulls up the handful of resources that have been tagged as relevant supplemental data sources for that specific predictor. As you can see, this pulls up something called the Financial Health and Wealth Dashboard, as well as the Opportunity Occupations Monitor and the US Department of Labor's compiled state minimum wage laws. When they click the title of any of these in a separate tab, it will open up that data resource and then they can pursue further data exploration. Now, I want to point out that there's two tags here that are important. The first is predictor, which shows you whether these data sources are relevant for a specific part of the framework. You can see that for the Financial Health and Wealth Dashboard, there's actually 3 predictors in the framework that these data are relevant for. We also include a geography tag, which tells you what geographic level of detail these data are available at. So for our community group, which was looking to find more granular data about industries and potential demographics that are affected by these jobs, it looks like that Financial Health and Wealth Dashboard is going to have more granular information because it's a local geography data source versus the 2 state ones that are listed there as well. So when our community group then scrolls further down this page, they'll see that there's another subheader called Best Practices for Identifying Reliable Local Data, which gives them an alternative starting point, because that repository of data sources that I just walked you through, it includes a lot of options, but it's not the be-all, end-all of all potential extra data and information that exists for their community. This list of best practices explains where they can potentially turn next within their own community to gain even further insights. Let's now turn to how the community group can answer their next question, which is, how is this mobility metric related to upward mobility in my community? When you're looking at any metric on the data dashboard, like we were for pay of an average job, you'll notice that there is a hyperlink at the top of the page. It reads as, learn more about this predictor and promising interventions. It's just under the predictor title. And when you click on this, it takes you to the upward mobility website page for that specific predictor in our framework. Now, all of these pages, there's one for each of the predictors, they start off with evidence on the relationship between the predictor and upward mobility as an outcome. So you can explore all of the research and evidence that was consulted to include that predictor in our upward mobility framework. And it explains how that predictor is shown to improve long-term economic success, power and autonomy, and dignity and belonging, which, as you remember, are the 3 parts of upward mobility. Now let's remember, they had a third question, which was, okay, I've looked at the numbers, I've looked at the evidence, what next? How can we address this metric with the work that we do as a group? So further down that same predictor page I was just talking about, that had all of the evidence and research, is a section that's called Promising Local Policy Interventions. And this section compiles research from both the Urban Institute and other organizations that show suggested policy interventions based on strategies that have shown incredible promise in communities across the country when people have tried to target this predictor before. For example, when this team chooses to click on the first bullet, which says living wage ordinances, it will take them to Results for America's Economic Mobility Catalog, which is a resource explicitly designed to curate a set of strategies, programs, and interventions that evidence shows helps communities have better economic outcomes. And then further down the page, if they were to click on increasing wages for local government workers, they'll be taken to the Economic Policy Initiatives Institute's page summarizing ways to raise wages for public sector workers using specific policy interventions. Now, these are just a few examples of how this resource can give our example community group a starting point for thinking about how to take action. But it provides a range of evidence-based solutions and external research, as well as case studies, to explore and to learn from. It's important in general to remember that the mobility metrics are meant to be a starting point. The understanding of mobility conditions that the metrics are encouraging, that can only be strengthened with more and further knowledge exploration. So communities can use the local data repository or the list of best practices to pursue more sources of local administrative data that will better represent their unique local environment and circumstances. Also, based on the trends that they see over time in the mobility metrics or the interventions that they learn are the most promising, communities can and should turn to historical records in their region in order to gain a better understanding of the context of their mobility conditions. It's very important to know how and why you've gotten to where you are currently in your community. Also, along with this, exploring such things such as your political landscape, your budget resources, potential partners and opposition organizations that may exist in your community, these all help inform what's called an ecosystem map, which can be a very useful guide for communities going through the process of planning for feasible and realistic solutions for upward mobility in their community. And lastly, I want to emphasize, of course, quantitative data is not the only way to measure mobility conditions in your community. Engaging your community members, documenting and learning about their lived experiences, and getting corroboration or pushback on these numbers from people that are living in the communities that those outcomes describe, these are all very key for determining the right path of action, as well as for getting community buy-in for any eventual policy efforts that you choose to pursue. And, addressing root causes of upward mobility, that takes much more than just data. We know that this is very intricate and holistic work, but data are an excellent starting point. And many resources exist online and in person within your own communities. But we are super excited to provide this suite of tools and resources in tandem with this very extensive data dashboard to help support more thorough planning and exploration. And these are all valuable tools for the hard and important work of creating upward mobility in your communities. And we look forward to seeing and learning from all that you will do from them. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. I hope that last presentation inspires you to look beyond just what's on the dashboard and find data that exists in your hometown or where you live, and then not stop there, but go to your community and find out what their priorities are and how they align with the data. So for our next presenter, for nearly a year, the Upward Mobility Initiative team has been working with CF Leads to explore how community foundations can use the Upward Mobility Framework. Together, we've examined how these organizations can play a key role in cross-sector partnerships to drive upward mobility. Dr. Leonard Brock, who is Vice President for Learning and Impact, will share how CF Leads is using the mobility metrics in their work. Alongside local data, they're moving beyond grant making and towards leadership, collaboration, and equity. Dr. Brock is inspired by his mother, who passed away in 2019. She was a single mother of 3. She struggled immensely due to cultural and structural limits that placed restrictions on her dreams and aspirations. Her struggles ignited a fire inside of Dr. Brock. This prompted an inner purpose, which he often refers to as cold anger. This anger does not dissipate. It's calculated, methodical, and laser-like in focus. Dr. Brock's passion is fueled by his desire to see systemic change. This desire resulted from lived experiences and from witnessing firsthand the effects of structural and cultural inequity and inequality. Dr. Brock has been an instrumental partner in much of our work, and we're so lucky to have him with us today.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Let me try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. That's the energy I like to see. I'd like to start by thanking the Urban Institute for their unwavering support and for hosting this opportunity for CF Leads to be able to share a critical aspect of our work. Again, my name is Leonard Brock. I am the Vice President for Learning and Impact at CF Leads, where I am responsible for overseeing our economic mobility and racial equity portfolio of work. It's truly an honor to be here to discuss how community foundations can use local data to drive upward mobility and systemic change in their regions. As someone deeply involved with data, and trust me, I am not a data scientist, my goal today is to offer a real-world perspective of how data can act as a bridge and a catalyst to better opportunities for communities, especially when used strategically by community foundations. Data isn't just numbers. It's a tool for transformation that can help us pinpoint barriers and unlock pathways for growth and equity. But first, I want to ask you a question. I often ask this question for those or with those I work alongside is, can you dream with me? As cliche as this next statement may sound, it's mired with a bit of truth that is often overlooked or misunderstood. If you can conceive it and believe it, and I want to put heavy emphasis on belief, you could achieve it. So I asked the audience, can you believe with me together we can improve upward mobility for those in our communities who need it most? Can you believe with me? Yes. Awesome. I strongly believe and what is known as collective consciousness can shift current day reality, but that's a talk for another day. I don't want to get too esoteric or metaphysical on you. But at CF Leads, we are uniquely focused on helping community foundations step into leadership roles in their region. We believe in a simple but powerful idea. Local problems require local solutions, and those solutions need to be informed by good data. Furthermore, commissioning and disseminating data is one of our core leadership competencies that we work to advance in addition to others. Data helps us see the full picture, where the gaps are, who is being left behind, what specific interventions will make the most impact. We've been working with community foundations across the country to improve upward mobility. Through data, we can tell what's holding back progress and where we need to target our efforts to lift more families out of poverty. Although reducing poverty and increasing wealth are not synonymous, they are not one and the same. Both are critical in order to move the needle regarding economic mobility. This work isn't just about understanding the present, but also about shaping a future where all communities can thrive, again, if we believe it. A key element of our work is through action networks, which brings community foundations together to tackle local challenges in a collaborative environment. But these networks aren't just learning spaces, they are platforms where community foundations can apply local data to real world and systemic problems in workforce development, housing, racial equity, amongst other areas. I am of the belief the most critical challenges are the result of system failures, not individual efforts. And we work with community foundations that are committed to population level outcomes, i.e. systems change. For example, through our Economic Mobility Action Network, we've brought together community foundations such as the Chicago Community Trust to focus on advancing economic mobility while reducing racial disparities. This collaborative network helps community foundations move beyond traditional grant making to take on leadership roles, using local data to prioritize investments, collaborate with stakeholders, and create long-lasting change. These changes have spurred small business development, led to more affordable housing options for residents, increased childcare slots in support of workforce development, et cetera, et cetera. Data-driven leadership is seen at the Greater Washington Community Foundation, for example, which has taken a bold approach through its Health Equity Fund. This $95 million initiative focuses on addressing social determinants of health, things like education, housing, and economic mobility, which are all interrelated and codependent, which have a huge impact on health outcomes. By using local data to identify the root causes of health disparities, the foundation has been able to allocate $22 million in grants to programs aimed at reducing health inequities across Washington, D.C. The beauty of this work is that it doesn't stop at improving health outcomes. It goes further by linking economic mobility to health equity. This integrated approach is a powerful example of how community foundations can lead the charge in transforming their regions with data at the center. Collaboration is another area where data plays a critical role. Foundation for the Carolinas is a leading example of how collaboration can multiply impact. Through the Carolina Urban-Rural Connection, they've linked urban and rural communities across North and South Carolina, addressing common challenges like economic development, education, and housing. One of their standout projects is the creation of the Discovery Place Kids Museum in Richmond County, which was the cornerstone that led to huge economic revitalization as well as partnership within the local region. At CF Leads, we are deeply committed to using data as a lens for equity. Disaggregating data in race by race, income, and geography allows us to see the full scope of inequities that affect marginalized communities. A good example of this work is from the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, which is part of the Connecticut Urban Opportunity Collaborative. They've used disaggregated data to focus on issues like educational disparities and housing stability. This data has allowed them to tailor their grant-making and advocacy efforts, ensuring that resources are directed where they are needed most. One of the most powerful tools that CF Leads is using to support our community foundations is the Upward Mobility Data Dashboard. I have to roll out a little bit. Upward Mobility Data Dashboard, developed by the Urban Institute. Yes, the data dashboard, which brings us all here today. With Urban support, we've hosted a number of regional convenings across the country to support community foundations in using the dashboard to retrieve localized, actionable insights that can inform policy decisions and collective action. For example, the Community Foundation of Sarasota County is using these tools to focus on affordable housing solutions. By analyzing local data on housing, affordability, and stability, they are building partnerships with local government and private developers and creating innovative housing solutions that are now being scaled across the region. This is a great example of how community foundations can use data to not only identify problems, but also drive solutions that have long-term impacts on economic mobility. As we look toward the future, CF Leads remains committed to working with community foundations across the country by leveraging tools like the Upward Mobility Framework and assessing local data on the new Upward Mobility Data Dashboard. Let me say that one more time. Upward Mobility Data Dashboard. We are confident that community foundations will not only lead, but also transform their regions in ways that ensure upward mobility for all. Again, thank you, Urban Institute, for your partnership, and to all of you for your commitment to using data as a force for good. Together, we are shaping a more prosperous and equitable future, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dr. Brock. Okay, everyone say it with me. Upward, mobility, data, dashboard. Okay, we'll get it. Just keep working on it. As a reminder, please keep those questions coming. You can use the QR code on the screen, or if you're virtual, you can put it in the Q&A box. So one of the great strengths about the mobility metrics is that they provide a starting point for localities to understand how the pillars of support are performing at a national, county, and city level. Marjorie Austin Turner, who is an Institute Fellow at Urban, will now join us to share key insights from her and Cassandra Martinchek's recently published report, How Well Do U.S. Communities Support Residents' Upward Mobility? Marge is inspired by evidence that cannot be ignored, that the U.S. systematically built separate and unequal neighborhoods, separate and unequal schools, separate and unequal jobs, policing, and health. She is inspired by the activists who use that evidence to argue that if we built it, we can dismantle it and do better. We can provide everybody in our country with pillars of support for economic well-being, power, and autonomy. Without further ado, Marge Turner.
Thanks, Lee, and thanks to everyone for joining us today in person or virtually. It's really exciting to be sharing this work with you, and we're excited to learn from your questions and your feedback going forward. So as you've heard, the mobility metrics were designed to assess the performance of the local pillars of support people need to enable their economic success, their power, and their dignity. But we can also use the mobility metrics to paint a national picture, to explore how well communities all across the country are supporting upward mobility. Using data from all U.S. counties, we computed national measures of the average American's experience. You'll find them in the data dashboard as context for your local results, and my colleague Cassie Martinchek and I have published them in a report, a national snapshot of supports for upward mobility. I'm going to start off with a very quick explanation of how we used local metrics to tell a national story. In this mini example, every block is a county, and every county has a metrics value. There are 10 imaginary counties altogether in this example, and we sort them based on their values, from weakest supports to strongest supports. Then we weight each county's value by that county's population. So counties with small populations don't contribute as much to the whole picture as counties with big populations. Now this bar represents the local experiences of all people living in these 10 imaginary counties. The value that falls in the middle is the median, what the median or average person experiences. We also report values for the 5% of people experiencing the weakest local conditions and the 5% of people experiencing the strongest local conditions. So we were able to apply this method to almost all the metrics. And we found that the strength of supports for upward mobility varies widely across the country, with the average experience often falling substantially below what people need to thrive. For example, let's look at how wages from the average job compare to the local cost of living. In the median local experience, earnings from an average job only cover about 2/3 of the cost of living for a family of 3. In the weakest experience, the average job only covers about half the cost of living. And even in the strongest experience, average wages fall a little short of the cost of living. At the same time, I think everybody is well aware that housing costs have outpaced incomes in communities all across the country. So homes and apartments that lower income families can afford are in short supply. In the average experience, the available housing that's affordable for families with low incomes falls short of demand. That's 80% of area median income, and it's the bottom line here in this set of lines. Even in the strongest local experience, the available and affordable housing for people with low incomes barely exceeds their demand. And in the weakest experience, supply only meets about 3/4 of demand. And you can see from the other lines here that these shortages are much more severe at very low and extremely low income levels, even when you look at the strongest experience across the country. When we look across all our metrics, we find that no counties provide consistently strong support across all 5 pillars. And although no county performs poorly on all metrics, all counties perform in that weakest 5% on some. So every place has work to do, and every place has some assets to build upon. Moreover, in every county across the country, our nation's history of racial discrimination and segregation has built inequities into the performance of the 5 pillars, disadvantaging people of color. I'm going to highlight just a few examples here. Decades of evidence teach us that neighborhoods of concentrated poverty pose profound challenges for their residents. These neighborhoods often suffer from disinvestment, lack essential services like high-quality schools or decent grocery stores, and they experience high rates of crime and violence, including violence by police. In the average American's experience, only 4% of all households experiencing poverty live in neighborhoods of high poverty. But when we look at differences by race and ethnicity, we find the rate of concentrated poverty exposure is 3 times higher for Black households. And in the weakest experience nationwide, 4 of 10 Black households experiencing poverty live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. Throughout most of the US, this neighborhood segregation problem goes hand in hand with racial and economic segregation in public schools. Children of color are far more likely than white children to attend high poverty schools, which pose profound challenges for both teaching and learning. In the average local experience, 32% of Black children and 29% of Latinx children attend high poverty schools, compared with only 7% of white children. And in the worst local experience, 85% of Black children, 81% of Latinx children, and to me, a surprisingly high 60% of white children attend high poverty schools. Although people of color are just as likely to work as white people, they earn substantially less due to labor market inequities like employment discrimination and occupational segregation. People of color have lower incomes than white people at every point along the income distribution, with Black people facing the greatest disadvantage, represented by the pink column in this chart. When we focus on the lowest income quintile of each group, Black households earn $17,000 a year compared to about $29,000 for all households. And focusing on the highest income quintile of each group, Black households earn about $94,000 compared to $131,000 for all households. Finally, white people hold a disproportionate share of local housing wealth relative to their share of the population. And this reflects and drives inequities in civic and political power, as well as economic security and success. In the average experience, the ratio of white-held housing wealth to the number of white households is 1.14, compared to only 0.54 for Black households, 0.66 for Latinx households, and 1 for other races and ethnicities. We'd expect these values to be 1 if housing wealth was equitably distributed. That's just a few of the findings reported in our national snapshot. This national analysis of the mobility metrics provides a descriptive overview of profound barriers to upward mobility across the United States, a starting point for deeper inquiry and strategic solutions. We invite all of you, changemakers working at local, state, and national levels, to use our mobility metrics along with local data and on-the-ground experience to catalyze and inform action that strengthens the pillars of support for upward mobility. So all people, especially those who have been systematically excluded, can experience economic success, power, and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge, for that descriptive presentation. And just a reminder, if you're here in our office today, if you wouldn't mind just silencing your cell phone. Good timing on that one. Just like that. It's all good. It happens. They're very hard to use. Maybe I can do that like on cue. Silencers. Anyway, if you're virtual, you don't have to worry about that. To close out our presentations today, I'm excited to introduce Myra Jones-Taylor, who is the Senior Vice President of Impact and External Affairs at Urban. She will be discussing how communities can be transformed through evidence and leadership. Does anyone recognize where that is, by the way, in DC? Mount Pleasant, all right, nice. Took me a little bit, but you can tell the Heller's Bakery is a giveaway. But it doesn't have that really good taco place. This is pre-La Tejana, so. Anyway, Myra is inspired by the people she sees when she walks through her neighborhood. On those walks, Myra encounters families with young children walking to the racially and socioeconomically diverse neighborhood school. She encounters tradespeople working to build owner-occupied homes and federally subsidized housing. She encounters an unhoused woman sweeping the corner of the street where she lives most of the time. She encounters professionals walking their dogs between Zoom calls. She encounters one of the oldest Latino-serving health clinics in DC. She encounters Asian, Black, Latino, and white small business owners. And finally, she encounters a man managing his mental illness who just started acknowledging her for the first time after many months of greeting him. Myra is inspired by the humanity and promise in each of them. Please join me in welcoming Myra to the stage.
Good afternoon. If you were wondering, yes, I do live on Sesame Street. No, I'm really fortunate to live in an incredible supportive community. It is great to see you all. I'm thrilled to be here today and incredibly proud of the phenomenal work that went into producing the data dashboard. This is a pivotal moment for us all, one that can reshape how we drive and support community-driven upward mobility in the United States. I have spent my career working to advance policies and programs that make a tangible difference in the lives of children, families, and communities. And I've seen firsthand how policy that is grounded in community insights, data, and collaborative action can have transformational impact. For instance, we know that the first 3 years of life are crucial for lifelong well-being. That's why supportive policies and programs designed for children and families are so important, and it's why I've spent my career fighting for them. As the founding commissioner of early childhood for the state of Connecticut, the chief policy officer at 0 to 3, and now as the senior vice president of impact and external affairs here at Urban. In 2021, something remarkable happened in this country. Child poverty was cut in half. Usually I get an applause for that, right? Can we talk about that? We can trace this incredible improvement in the lives of children and families to the bipartisan decision to expand the child tax credit. As my Urban Institute colleagues documented, the expanded child tax credit allowed families to better meet the needs of their children. The credit reduced food insecurity, fostered economic security, and allowed parents to invest in their children and themselves. As many of you know, the policy has since expired, and attempts to make it permanent have failed to pass in Congress. But that temporary expansion gave us proof of concept. It showed us that when we commit to informed, people-centered policy, we can achieve monumental changes that improve lives and create a more equitable society. Today, we learned about the many ways to see and understand the challenges our communities face and the opportunities we have to address them. Marge provided a national snapshot of upward mobility, and she illustrated for us that with good data, communities can identify opportunities to build upon their successes and strengths, and dismantle barriers that block upward mobility and perpetuate racial inequalities so all communities and families can thrive. That is the difference that data can make. I want to share a story that illustrates this reality and the power of data and community-informed action. In 2021, Boone County, Missouri was selected as one of 8 counties across the country that would receive assistance from the Urban Institute to use the Upward Mobility Framework as a tool to drive toward impact. A diversity of groups came together to engage in this collaborative project. Urban provided resources, technical assistance, and peer learning to help the county address some of its most pressing challenges. Boone County's Community Services Department, Cradle to Career Alliance, and Central Missouri Community Action formed the project's leadership team. And over 40 partners came to the table, including Columbia Public Schools, Heart of Missouri United Way, Missouri Faith Voices, the Veterans United Foundation, and the University of Missouri, just to name a few. When Boone County leaders began using the Upward Mobility Initiative's tools and resources, the county's overall indicators for well-being looked quite positive on the surface. But when they dug deeper, breaking down the data by race, a very different reality emerged. White families were thriving, with lower poverty rates, higher scores in measures of school achievement, and better health outcomes. Families of color, specifically Black families, disproportionately experienced higher poverty rates, poorer school outcomes, more referrals to juvenile justice, and poorer health outcomes. These disparities meant that if you were a person of color within the county, you were at severe disadvantage for economic mobility. This discovery inspired Boone County's Mobility Action Plan. Guided by data and community input, they created work groups targeting these 3 key areas and facilitated by community leaders representing partnering organizations. Just to name a few, they were Jobs and Workforce Development, led by Alvin Cobbins with the Minority Men's Network, Fair and Inclusive Housing, facilitated by Jane Williams with Love Columbia, and Early Grade Literacy, led by Alvin Plummer with the Minority Men's Network. Together with the work groups, Boone County leaders relied on the data to drive action and accountability. They connected local employers with individuals who often face barriers to employment, particularly young people and those with criminal records, allowing people to find stable jobs, support their families, and pursue further education. They developed second chance leasing programs to improve access to sustainable, affordable housing, giving people who have experienced housing instability and homelessness a fresh start. And they created partnerships between schools and community groups to support early literacy, ensuring that children who have struggled with reading receive the support they need to succeed in school. There is a great deal more ongoing. This collaborative effort in this county that is setting the stage for transformative outcomes we will see over the next generation and beyond. You've heard my colleagues on the stage talking about the people who have inspired them most. When we asked Joanne Nelson, Community Services Director with Boone County, the same question, she told us about the amazing and hardworking people of Boone County and the people who work in the Community Services Department, who have a passion for making sure the community is offering the very best to every person it can. Through collaboration, accountability, and commitment to addressing racial and economic disparities, Boone County is building a stronger, more inclusive community. For the people of Boone County, this means a future where every individual, regardless of their background, has the chance to thrive and achieve their fullest potential. This is an exciting opportunity. The Upward Mobility Framework, data dashboard, resources, and tools can empower committed leaders and stakeholders to take action in their communities. And here are 3 specific ways to do that, if you want to take notes. First, understand your community. Use the dashboard to see how your community is doing on key mobility metrics. Second, prioritize areas for action. Identify and focus on the areas most in need of attention and resources. And third, collaborate for greater impact. No one organization or leader can solve entrenched community challenges alone. Data has the power to bring together government, nonprofits, community leaders, and other stakeholders to create meaningful, measurable change together. The dashboard, though, isn't just a tool. It's a catalyst for collaboration and action. I want to leave you with this one message. Even with gridlock at the federal level, local leaders can still create measurable, sustainable improvements in our communities. We have the tools to make change in our neighborhoods starting now. Data that have been collected responsibly and resourced equitably are our allies. They allow us to pinpoint what our communities need, what works, and inspire us to act with conviction. Earlier today, you were asked to think of who inspires you to do this work. I challenge you to dream of the community, city, state, and even the nation with a vision that includes transformative, systemic change that improves lives. It is possible. We can create a future with the results we actually want versus the changes we think are merely realistic. My challenge is for us to fully believe in the possibilities of our communities where everyone feels valued, like they truly belong, and knows they can build the life that they want. Let's believe it enough to make it so, and let's do it together. It has been my pleasure to share this moment of inspiration and celebration with you all. The work continues, and I am looking forward with great excitement to seeing the incredible progress that lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra, and let's give another round of applause for all of our wonderful speakers today. So far today, we have explored quite a few things. We've explored how local leaders can leverage local data using the dashboard and community sources to better understand and transform conditions in their neighborhood. We learned how local data can empower community foundations and other backbone organizations to develop impactful solutions. From a national perspective, we observe that no place consistently provides strong support across all pillars for upward mobility. But while every place has work to do, each also has unique assets to build upon. We heard a powerful story of a community using data to highlight the stark realities facing Black families. We also heard about that community's efforts to build a stronger, more inclusive community, one where everyone can achieve their full potential. Finally, we were inspired just now to envision the future we want for our own communities. Now we want to hear from you all. Up next, we'll be hosting a Q&A panel with all of our presenters. We encourage you to continue to submit questions using the QR code on the screen or in the Q&A chat if you're tuning in virtually. The Q&A panel will be moderated by Kimberly Burrows, who is a Training and Technical Assistance Senior Manager at Urban, and she has worked on this project since 2019, so she brings a wealth of knowledge. When asked what motivates Kimberly in this work, she referenced a 1976 Bob Marley song titled War. Marley sang in this song, "Until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, me say war." That until basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, dis ya war. These powerful lyrics originally came from Ethiopian Emperor Selassie's speech at the UN General Assembly. Marley used the words in his song to protest oppression and promote unity worldwide. Kimberly, who's also a native of Jamaica, is inspired by these words. Through her work, she strives to ensure programs and policies drive action for everyone to experience a more equitable future. She envisions a future where everyone feels empowered to succeed. I'd like to invite now Kimberly and the other members of the panel to the stage.
All right, so we're settling in. I gave Lee a small tutorial this morning of how to say the lyrics like with a true Jamaican patois, and I think he did a very good job. Yeah, so let's give her a round of applause. Yeah, Jamaican says that he's certified. We're happy with that. You all were really in for a treat this afternoon with all these lightning talks. They were fantastic. And I'm really excited that I get to now do the job of asking them some tough questions that came in from you all via the QR code. So let's just jump into it because we have lots of things to unpack and discuss after the conversation today. When Myra was speaking, she spoke about this journey around like inspiring and celebrating, and that's why we're all here today. And I really want to send the first question over to Marge because this has been a journey. You've been doing this upward mobility racial equity research for several years. And I'm just curious, with this launch of your new paper and some of the things you spoke about in your lightning talk, what are some of the more surprising things that came out of that new research?
Thanks, Kimberly. What really surprised me, I have to say, is this tremendous variability of pillar performance across the country. I expected that we would find that some counties were performing pretty well and some were performing pretty poorly. I didn't expect that every county would be strong on some metrics and weak on others, that every county would have a whole lot of work still to do, but also have some strengths to build upon. So that was really the overarching surprise for me that came from looking at those median experience, weak experience, strong experience.
Mm-hmm. That's really great. And it makes me consider that there are some communities that don't have the strong data capacity to do this work. They may have a very small staff if they have any data analysts that are on their teams. And so, Tina, from the work that you're doing, I'm curious, for these more under-resourced communities, what advice would you have for them as they're thinking about using some of these tools?
So actually, we designed the data and a lot of the tools that are associated with the data dashboard to explicitly be for lower capacity organizations or change makers who are interested in getting involved in this type of work. We wanted to have ready-made, easily accessible, and quickly adaptable resources that they could leverage for their own purposes. It's very much a starting point, of course, but we want these to be used as much as possible by anyone who's able to access them.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel like they're different actors. I mean, this audience is very representative of that, of folks who would be accessing the data dashboard, looking at the upward mobility framework. And Leonard, in your lightning talk, you spoke a lot about the power that community foundations have and how they could be utilized and leveraging some of these tools. Yep. I was wondering if you could just share a little bit more about what a community foundation could do with this data dashboard, what types of decisions they might be able to make.
Yeah, many community foundations are using data to identify either target populations, specific catchment areas in which they should focus their efforts to have the greatest return on financial and social investment. Many community foundations refer to it as discipline of development, so they can understand a broader strategy in the ways in which they can support the overall effort to drive upward mobility. So it could be used as a catalyst for fund development and grant making, but also for community impact and being able to drive a target population towards the outcomes that they're working to achieve.
Mm-hmm. That's great, because that sort of touches on this idea of programs and policies, various initiatives that might be happening on the local level. And at Urban, especially in the Research to Action Lab, we often think about how do you connect some of this data to something that actually drives solutions on the ground. And I think that's a very critical component of having this dashboard. And so wanted to turn to one of these questions here, which is really thinking about, okay, as you have this dashboard that's here and you're mobilizing new policies, new programs, how might you be able to elevate data? And Sam, I want to go over to you for this question.
Yeah, and if I can just return to the 4 ways you can use the dashboard that I mentioned earlier, in case folks remember, they're understand, contextualize, prioritize, and monitor. In this case, thinking about new policies and programs, I'd probably start with just looking across the full range of predictors, trying to identify, where to start. Where am I doing well? Where am I doing poorly? And, say a local leader, maybe a city council member, does that for their community, and they see that actually, there are quite a lot of jobs in my community, and they pay relatively well, but housing costs are just off the roof. Nobody can afford an apartment or to even buy a house in where I live, which is the case for many places across the country, including California, where I'm from. Then, they could probably dig a little bit deeper to try and understand, are housing costs substantially different for different types of people in my community? How do they look in neighboring communities? Is this unique to our place or is it not? But then after that, as Tina was mentioning, the mobility metrics are really meant to be a starting point. And so you will have to gather other data, both quantitative and qualitative, to try and understand what is driving those housing costs. Is it really just the lack of supply, or is it something else? And that is going to require trying to identify root causes using some of the methods that Tina lifted up and some of the resources that she mentioned, because you can't identify the right intervention without really understanding what is happening behind the scenes. And I don't know, Tina, if you want to add anything to that or talk about other resources that could be helpful?
No, I think that's all really great points. And again, a lot of these resources exist on our Upward Mobility website, so please feel free to check that out. There's so many more than even those I could have mentioned or included on the slide from earlier.
Yeah, that's actually a really good plug for the website, because I'll mention that we have a ton of questions that are coming in right now. So if there's anything that we are not able to respond to, you can take a look. We have an FAQ section on the website. We also have some upcoming resources so that you all can go ahead and plug in and hear more about the work. So I'll mention that because I don't think we'll be able to get to all the questions. But Sam, something that you were saying before is really connected to place. And thinking about, you were talking about housing costs. I live here in DC. It's something that is very much top of mind for our work. And looking at deeper into some of the data, what exactly is the data showing? Like, does it tell you a little bit about what's happening here right now? What happens when someone moves? And Marge, I know this is some of your research, and so would love for you to, share a little bit more on that.
Sure. One of the challenges of developing metrics that try to describe the systems in place that either boost or block upward mobility is that there is always the chance that you will be misled if there's a whole lot of population change happening in a neighborhood or in a jurisdiction. It might appear that things are getting a whole lot better when in fact a whole lot of people whose circumstances are better are moving in. So we've tried really hard to choose metrics that are less sensitive to that problem. Metrics that focus on the availability of housing units, not what particular people are paying today, or the availability of physicians relative to the size of the population, not what an individual's health outcomes are. So these are near-term, intermediate-term measures of the conditions that the community provides for the people living in it, whether they're newcomers, long-term stayers, whether they benefit and move away. We've really tried to focus on those systems. Now, it's not perfect, right? Because sometimes the only way you can measure how well a system is working is how well are people doing who are affected by that system. So there's a mushy line between measures of systems and measures of outcomes for people. So we've tried to be careful. The documentation in the website helps you think about those issues as you look at the data, but it's something to have in mind. Is there a lot of demographic change, flow in, flow out, happening in my community at this time? How might that be affecting or affected by changes in the metrics that we're reporting?
Yeah, and actually, speaking of the changes, I have two other data questions that are coming in. One of them, Sam, I'm going to ask you, which is a very simple question of, how often will these metrics be updated? Because I think that does lead into what Marge is also considering.
Yeah, and the short answer is we're hoping to update it every year. The long answer is that because all the metrics come from varying data sources, and those are updated at varying frequencies at different times of year, every metric might not get an additional year of data every year. But as researchers here at the Urban Institute, we know the importance of timely data, and so we're absolutely going to do our best to update them as much as possible.
All right, okay. Well, that was the easy question. Now, the harder question, the harder question is, looking at the suite of metrics and the things that we have, why not just do a composite score? Why not just pull everything together into a large upward mobility score for a place? And Tina, I want to ask you this question because I know you've probably gotten this one in the past, but tell us, why not?
Yeah, so firstly, yes, definitely this has been brought up before, and we understand that if it remains a persistent user need, we're constantly listening and learning as a team here at Urban, and we will do what we can to provide proactively data resources that are useful for the needs that people communicate to us. But there are a couple of reasons that making a composite score was particularly challenging, and therefore we turned away from it. And firstly, it's that, the framework is inherently designed in a way to encourage further exploration rather than quick and easy surface level takeaways. And for example, consider the fact of a community that may be particularly strong on one whole pillar within the framework, but then is really struggling in another pillar, right? If we were to be equally weighting the pillars in a composite metric, right, then that could be misleadingly neutral if you were to look at the overall takeaway figure. And unless you were motivated or told explicitly to look further, you wouldn't fully understand the picture of the mobility conditions in your community. And on top of that, it's also a technical issue, which is that each of the metrics has both a different unit magnitude as well as differences in directionality, right? So for some of the metrics, it's better to be lower in number, some of them it's better to be higher. And a lot of that can be corrected for, but there's so much technical consideration that goes into it, it hasn't been a comparative advantage to date.
Yeah, and actually seeing so many data questions, I think we have folks that have lots of data capacity that's asking things. And so it makes me think earlier when we asked about, more under-resourced organizations that may not have the capacity, we should also ask the flip of that. So for folks that may already have their local plans, or they might have their own data dashboard that's already set up, how can they use the mobility metrics to complement that? And I'd love, Leonard, if you could speak a little bit of how you've seen community foundations do that. And then Marge, you could always complement that with some stories that you're hearing from the field. So, Leonard.
It could be used as a tool to reinforce or validate what they're learning and what they're seeing in the data that they're collecting. It could also be used as a crosswalk. I know many community foundations are starting to adopt, it's not local data, but sustainable development goals, SDGs, and they're crosswalking those with the upward mobility framework to figure out what is the best data they can use to drive outcomes. So many community foundations are still looking to develop their data infrastructure and to have exposure to these data suites. So it's less of a challenge. I think more data, the better. The more informed, the better. But needless to say, they're using it to either reinforce, to validate, or also using it as a crosswalk to drive change. That's the simple way of framing it.
Great. Marge?
I would just add that from the beginning of thinking about the framework and the metrics and how they can be helpful, we've really avoided falling into the trap of saying, this is the answer, this is the right way to think about these problems, do it this way or don't come talk to us anymore. Instead, we're much more interested in saying, how can we be helpful? Does this complement the work you're doing on social determinants of health or sustainable development or an anti-poverty strategy? And we've had wonderful conversations with folks working on the ground who find the framework helps them think more clearly about how the bodies of work they're pursuing on workforce and education and housing and governance, how those tie together. And I've talked to one community that said, we really love those 5 pillars, but for us, there's a 6th. So that's terrific. And we hope people can find this additive and inspiring for the work they're already doing.
That's great. And as we're on the train of giving advice to local leaders, I was thinking, Myra, back to some of the comments that you had made, really considering that, a lot of this work is being driven at either the local or the hyper-local level, but, we do have that election coming up. And so just wondering, as people are thinking about federal and national policies, what advice do we have for local leaders that are using tools like this to make decisions?
Yeah, thank you for that. I would say I've never met a member of Congress or a staffer who doesn't want to hear from their constituents and doesn't take that seriously. And so I would say, one, get to know your folks, your representatives, their offices. They are in district, and really use that data to tell the story of your community. And I would also say, when you don't have time for that, there are amazing groups of advocates or community leaders who can do that aggregation for you. Make sure they have the data that reflects your community. So that's at the federal level. There's a lot we can be doing. there. And then there is so much that happens at the state level that I think is an amazing opportunity for local leaders. When I was in state government, we would often hear from folks that, local community leaders, and if you come with data, if you come with like solid information, it is so helpful for us. I will say when I was on the executive side, but both on the legislative side, to be able to make the case for programs that we wanted to we wanted to put forth, and or not, or to push back on certain things, depending on who you're talking to. But I think there's so much that we can do at the local level that translates up to the state and to the federal level. Get to know your people and know, come prepared. I wouldn't say armed, but that sounds too aggressive. But come with your data. It's important.
And can I just add
Yeah,
quickly
go for it,
there?
Sam.
I didn't get to this in my presentation, but the dashboard makes it really easy to come prepared with data. There are 3 separate ways that you can download your data. You can download an image that you can put in your presentations or PDFs. You can share a link to the data card and just put that in an email to your representative, or you can export all the data and make your own charts and graphs and customize it to how you like. So I really hope people get a chance to play around with it and see what it's capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking of the folks that want to do that third thing of export all the data, how is this really different from Opportunity Atlas and other types of data dashboards or data that's just available within the upward mobility racial equity field? Tina, I know you've played around with the Atlas a few times. If you could share a little bit, and March, if you want to jump in.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of answers here. If you're speaking specifically about the Opportunity Atlas, that one is really unique because it's showing you intergenerational data. It's actually showing you outcomes for children of parents who were in different income profiles. And so that is like a very different approach than the one we take in our data dashboard, which is focusing more on immediate term and medium term community level condition measures, right? So we're focusing more on relatively contemporaneous systems level measures that are annual or, a little more frequent than that when it's feasible. Yeah. And so again, all of these are important actually. When you're doing this exploration work, it's a big part of what I was talking about earlier. Taking a look at every component of this can give you further insight into how these systems are functioning with each other. So every dashboard is valuable. Obviously, we want you to check out ours, but these are all great resources.
Yeah, I think focusing on the Opportunity Atlas data in particular, it's hugely valuable, and our 2 systems are really complementary because Opportunity Atlas, as Tina said, is capturing the long-term outcomes for people wherever they may have moved. And we're focusing on the near-term conditions in particular places that make that possible. And we're in conversation with our colleagues in those other organizations and looking for ways we can learn from each other and strengthen our tools based on their insights and vice versa.
That's great. And I'm seeing that we're getting some questions also on strategies. And I think that's interesting because right now we're talking about these strategic actions around advancing upward mobility. But this person wants to know, how do we couple that with other types of strategic actions around reparations, around wealth creation, these other larger pieces of thinking about prosperity at the local level? And I'm wondering, I'll throw this out to the whole panel if anyone wants to jump in on that question.
I would say that these data can be used to inform all of these things, right? So there's this does not have to be like you put it in this one bucket. You can really use this to advance and tell, I would say, a broader story about how these are all connected, because families and communities don't differentiate by the data sets, right? These are lived experiences that, and all of these data contribute to a person's experience and the resources that they have to bring to bear to the challenges that they face. So play with it and really think about how to tell that story and that narrative as it's meaningful to you.
I also think it's easier to strengthen your case making when there's data to substantiate the actual strategy. So they work hand in glove. Obviously, any strategy should be mired with good data, and there's no need for having good data if there's not a strategy in support of it. So they work hand in glove essentially. So the only thing that I would posit in response to that question is that the case making, lead with the data, because sometimes it's hard to address systemic challenges from a moral compass perspective, even though it's the right thing to do. but data seems to be bipartisan. Like you can work across aisles just having good data, and I think that could be used as a catalyst to accelerate progress.
And I would just add quickly that one of the tools we didn't get to talk about today is our guide for local action that some of our colleagues wrote after testing it out with 8 counties across the country. And that really leads you through a comprehensive planning process to, think about all the things that you need to do, all the data that you need to gather, all the people that you need to talk to figure out how to boost upward mobility in a way that intersects with all the different issues going on in your community and create holistic strategies and solutions that can change systems and not just, individual outcomes. So again, would encourage you to take a look at that. It's on our website, upward-mobility.urban.org.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sam, because I think all of you, and as you're responding, you're really talking about people's well-being. And I think that's just a critical part. And in the very beginning, when Lee was talking about the framework itself, it's very critical that we are thinking about ways in which to measure, does someone feel like they belong to their community? Do they identify to their groups? And I'm just wondering, as you all are doing this work and really looking at strategies on the local level, what does it look like to measure belonging? What does it look like to measure power and autonomy? And Marge, I know with this recent work, that's probably one of the things that you looked at. Could you share some more?
Sure. I think this is a place where our concepts and our aspirations are out ahead of readily available data. They are not out ahead of really terrific scholarship on how do you measure those concepts. But there is not readily available data at the local level that fully captures individual autonomy, collective power, and this sense of belonging, of being respected for one's contributions. So it's an area where we want to keep watching the scholarship and where we will strengthen the predictors and add metrics to the extent that we can, to the extent that they become available. But we're also really interested in hearing with you. When you engage with community members, when you gain access to qualitative and quantitative data that's only available for your place, what are you learning? What are you hearing about individual autonomy? I have control over my life. Collective power. We can make our community act in a way that serves us well. And do I have a sense that my contributions to the community in which I live, to the place I work, to my family, are really respected and valued?
Yeah, I also would add that it's great to have the aspirational goal, even though the data might not necessarily be there yet, to drive behavior. And when you think of around cross-sector partnerships or the work that community foundations or community organizations do, they do it with community. Yeah. In the absence of community, it's very hard to see any real gains. So the autonomy and the belonging and the other goals associated with economic success is absolutely imperative in order to drive any outcomes associated. So it's great to have the aspirational outlook, even though the actual data or the indicators may not necessarily be there yet to measure any progress.
That's really great. And I think we only have time for one more question. So I'm actually going to pose this to everyone on the panel. I'll also respond to it, so I won't leave you hanging. But really wanted to ask, how do we together all sustain this work? And I think for me, one of the main ways is actually picking up what you said, Leonard. I think it's really working in partnership with community members. So ensuring that we understand what's happening on the ground with community members. We're walking hand in hand, not just creating a table and then leaving the table, but saying we're going to continue to create new tables. And we're going to ensure that there are different voices that are included there. I think that's one of the ways that we can sustain the work. And Sam, would love if you could go next. How should we sustain the work together?
Yeah, I would say don't lose sight of what's going well in your community, what is good about your community, in addition to what needs to be improved. I think it's easy to get kind of lost in what's going wrong and what we need to do better. But if you really want to be committed to the long term, if you want to have that motivation, that drive to keep going, I think we also need to keep sight of what's good.
Great, Tina.
I think personally, I think there should be an emphasis on having shared language and having a shared understanding of your lived reality. I think that as much as like many different sectors and many different people approach this work, as long as you're able to effectively communicate and make sure you have a shared understanding of what needs to be prioritized and how it needs to be done, that makes the work more effective, and therefore people are more motivated and involved.
And Leonard, what would you say to sustain the work?
Sustain the work. I say the data we stop is the data we fail. Population level outcomes will require time. Systems change does not happen overnight.
Yeah.
And data shouldn't just be used as a tool to prove what's effective and what's ineffective, but a tool for course correction and continuous improvement and learning. So to sustain the work, it just will take the ability to be adaptive, to be patient, to course correct, and to understand that it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And like I said, the minute we stop is the minute we fail. So we just have to be persistent and work through it.
Great.
That's terrific. And I'm going to complement it with, and we have to build power in the communities most effective to do that sustained work for a generation that course corrects.
Great. Mara?
And I would just add, I think it's really important that you give us feedback and you share with us, this is going to be better and more user-friendly and more useful to you, the more we hear from you and we engage. I think that's critical. And then finally, these are people. Data are people. And it's really important that we don't lose sight of that when we are in the, heads down in the numbers.
I think that's a great way to end the panel. Data are people, so we know how we should be doing this work and doing it in partnership with real people. So will everyone give a round of applause for the panel? Thank you so much, everyone. And so to close us out today, I want to invite Urban's president, Sarah Rosenwortel, up to the stage. And
you guys can stay there because I promised to be super, super fast. If you don't mind, I don't want to be all that stands between folks and the drinks and snacks that are outside. So I am going to be really brief. And so if you don't mind, that would be great. I will also say that our landlord decided today was a great day to celebrate Oktoberfest. And since the weather wasn't cooperating, there's, at least earlier, there was an Oompa band and yodeling going on one floor up. So if that's your preferred celebration, that's available to you too. But first, I have to do some thanks, and I want to just do a couple of thoughts about moving forward, how each of you can be involved. First of all, we are so grateful to all the people who joined us and who spoke today, but obviously this represents unbelievable amount of work that is behind it. So there will be lots of thanks to be had very quickly, but most of all to all of you who joined us in person today and those who are online watching now live or in the future who want to make your communities stronger and who want to every tool possible at your disposal to do so. This was a Herculean effort. So many of my colleagues worked in many different ways that if I tried to name them all, I would not be able to do it. But I am so enormously proud of the kind of mix of place-based engagement and understanding what that entails and this deep thing that we are good at understanding access to information and how to empower people to use it. So there were teams across all of the domains that are represented there, across urban, who contributed, our web development team, our communications departments, who took this from sort of a vision to a launch. All of those folks have been the backbone, but also the people who came to us and gave us feedback on the early products. Their sort of user design focus meant that we didn't do something that just meant something to us, but actually meant something to the people that we hope will use this in the future, and that was completely invaluable. Our external partners, we have consultants and vendors and others who helped us to design and build this product, and they brought the dashboard to life. And then every part of Urban contributes to work, that whether it's from the facilities and HR to the experts who you heard from on the stage, and I am so proud of all of them too. We are finally enormously grateful to our friends at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have been our partners, working for almost 10 years on issues of economic mobility and how to help us support communities to understand the framework that Marge, and how to help them understand the problems of their own communities and the work that they want to do. And we are deeply grateful for not only their support, but their partnership in this exercise. At Urban, upward mobility is part of what we've been doing for almost 60 years, as we've been focusing on how to improve people's lives and strengthen community. And today we are excited for the chance to use these tools to have deeper engagement with all kinds of decision makers, whether it's activists in a community, whether it's local officials, whether it's the community foundation, whether it's the business community. We think of all of those actors and all of you here today and online. You are change makers. And it is you that we seek in our work every day to empower, to drive change through data, through evidence, and through the kind of understanding of information. So first of all, thank you for your work, and we hope this is helpful. I want to suggest a few ways that you can stay engaged and take on next steps, and then I will just add a invitation to a drink. So first of all, if you have, I know it's easy, you're going to get busy, take the time to kind of play. Take the time to dig in the data and the dashboards and make sure, see how it works for your places, the places you care about, and maybe some other places you knew, where you grew up, where your mom lives, whatever else is important to help you, because you know a different thing about places, and combine that knowledge together. You'll also find, as we've had a few advertisements for already, this Upward Mobility Framework Explainer and the Planning Guide for Local Action. Those tools, think a little bit about how it could be useful in your community. Please sign up for the newsletter to stay updated. There'll be events, learning opportunities, and lots. We will have ways for you to keep getting deeper into this information. There's an upcoming workshop where the dashboard creators are going to do a live demo and deeper dive into its functionality. And so all of you can sign up, you online and others, and it'll also be recorded. And finally, take a few minutes to give us some feedback. There's an event survey that you'll receive. Talk to us about the information you think is missing. Share with us the collective knowledge that exists in this crowd. 3,000 people signed up to hear this webinar today. And so there is so much insight that we can, I hope, create a virtuous cycle back and forth between our ability to support people making decisions and your ability to make our support stronger. We look forward to staying connected with you and energized about the vision of helping every community ensure that there's a brighter future for all of those who live in it. And I think this has been a great start. I'm so proud of the team. Please join us for a drink, and hopefully the Oompa band is done or not too loud. Thanks, everybody.